Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And in today's video, it really is showing that we really are ramping up to make things worse before they get better, because Labour are not even in power yet and they are showing naked corruption. And for those of you that were glancing at the news yesterday wondering why is everyone talking about Parliament, this is going to be a video that covers pretty much everything you'll need to know. Because as it turns out, the whole argument of we need to vote Tories to make sure Labour can't get in might actually have legs. Which for me is effectively verbal seppuku, and screams to me that we really are not going to get out of this at all without having to take a massive leftist bat to the face over and over for 5 years. So, where did this all start? Breaking. The Speaker selects both Government and Labour amendments in the SNP Gaza debate. Huge relief for Keir Starmer. And yeah, this is where everything that could possibly hit the fan did. Let's take a look at Lindsay Hoyle's speech.
We now come to the SNP motion on Gaza. I understand that the second motion on the order paper will not be moved today. This is a highly sensitive subject on which feelings are running high in the House, in the nation and throughout the world.
Now we all need to take each part of this speech into consideration here, because I have my suspicions that he put in that part of the speech effectively to cover his bum later in the day, because he's effectively saying emotions are running high. That feels like a little bit of a predecessor to I'm going to make a huge mistake, but I'm doing it because it feels right. That's effectively what he is trying to say there.
I think it's important on this occasion that the House is able to consider the widest possible range of options. I have therefore decided to select the amendments both in the name of the Prime Minister and in the name of the Leader of the Opposition.
For those of you wondering why there is such a harumph about that, to make things clear, it is an SNP opposition day. That means that the SNP should have priority to table their amendments and their business for the day. And what Lindsay Hoyle has effectively said here is that it's not just going to be an SNP day, it's going to be an SNP and Labour day. And in fact, he's put Labour in the higher priority than the SNP by doing this. And just to make it clear, there are 20 opposition days in total per session of Parliament. The SNP get 3, Labour gets 17. So in other words, Labour have 6 times the amount of sessions to put forward their amendments than the SNP do, and Lindsay Hoyle has decided no, on the one of the 3 days that the SNP have their day, it's still going to be a Labour day, which is why you're hearing initial hissing and booing of the Speaker, because this is very strange. This hasn't happened before.
Because the operation of Standing Order number 31 will prevent another amendment from being moved after the Government has moved its amendment. I will exceptionally call the opposition front bench spokesperson to move their amendment at the beginning of the debate. Once the SNP spokesperson have moved their motion, at the end of the debate, the House will have an opportunity to take a decision on the official opposition amendment. If that is agreed to, there is a final question on the main motion as amended. If the official opposition amendment is not agreed to, I will call the Minister to move the Government amendment formally. That will engage the order.
So to put it in simpler words, he has messed up the whole procedure for how opposition days work. Standing Order 31 effectively says that you can only bring in other opposition amendments once all the business of the opposition party's day that it is has been finished, i.e. when the SNP have gone through everything they want to go through, and if you have time, then you can bring in Labour's amendments. But he's not doing that. In fact, he's putting Labour's amendment first and having the vote on that first, prioritising Labour's agenda before the SNP's, and that's why people are going mad.
That will engage the provisions of Standing Order number 31. So the next vote will be on the original words in the SNP motion. If that is not agreed to, then the House will have the opportunity to vote on the Government amendment. Proceeding this way will allow a vote to take place potentially on all proposals from each of the three main parties.
And there's more of an uproar about that because, again, it's an SNP day. Their business needs to be complete before you bring in the third party of Labour. Otherwise, effectively, the Speaker who is supposed to be effectively the referee of the House, is effectively saying Labour can have more time as opposition than they should be allowed. And this is obviously going to more than annoy the SNP, because they are effectively being treated as a second-class party in that case, a second-class opposition party, when they should be the priority that day, and they're not being treated as such. And we will get into why once his speech is finished.
I could inform the House that there is a precedent for an official opposition spokesperson being called second in debate and move an amendment before a minister was called to speak in the debate in the circumstances. However, no government amendment has been tabled. I should also inform that the Clerk of the House will be placing in the library a letter to me about today's proceedings. I have asked for that letter to be made available in the vote office as soon as possible.
I find this part the funniest because this is Lindsay Hoyle effectively saying, I know that I am breaking precedent here, so an official who keeps me in check is having to publish a letter, and I want everyone to see it. Effectively because he has no choice. There's no way he can keep it secret. I mean, at least I suppose he is keeping in with procedure by publishing parliamentary papers that were going to be published anyway. But this is how non-precedent this is. The literal Clerk of the House, who we basically never hear from because things go as normal in Parliament usually, is literally having to write to the Speaker about today, about the details of what he's done right and wrong. And don't get me wrong, we're going to go through it later. But as I say, this was why at the start he said, tensions and emotions are running high, because he's trying to say, this was an emotional choice I made, don't blame me too much. Well, as we will go through, I have absolutely no sympathy.
Finally, I should tell the House that, in my opinion, the operation of Standing Order number 31, which governs the way amendments to the Opposition Day motions are dealt with, reflects an outdated approach.
I mean, that really is a punchline, isn't it? We've had this precedent for, what, years and years and years and years? And, when it comes to, having this precedent in place actually disadvantages Labour, and a Speaker of the House who was a Labour MP decides to change precedent, he says, oh no, this is outdated. Oh, it just happens to be outdated when it advantages Labour. And this is why the whole House erupts with laughter, because it's naked corruption. There's no hiding of it. Everyone can see what has happened. Labour have taken advantage of the fact that it is a man of their party in the Speaker's chair who is supposed to be completely neutral on these matters. But as we will go through, he wasn't exactly given much of a choice to be neutral, or at least Labour are trying to limit his options. Anyway, I've cut out all the laughter and all the back and forth, but I would actually go and give this entire video a watch because it is quite funny when the whole of Parliament erupts with laughter and threatens to leave.
Firstly, I should tell the House, in my opinion, the operation of Standing Order, which governs the way amendments to opposition motions are dealt with, reflects an outdated approach, which restricts the operations, which can put the House. It is my intention to ask the Procedure Committee to consider the operation.
I suppose on some level, at least he's trying to get it through the proper channels to actually make a change to this precedent, but really that's the type of thing that should be done before the Speaker makes the decision to change precedent. This whole episode is quite a funny look into how the British Constitution is actually put together, because effectively most of it is we have all these precedents in place, but really at any point Parliament can just overturn it all. But the thing is that because we live in a representative democracy, things like this do eventually get punished. At least in the ideal world. Obviously Tony Blair did just change all these precedents, and he is still yet to be punished, as are Labour. But, well, I suppose when you literally change the face of Britain, obviously its precedents and its ways of life are going to change as well. But I think the funny thing is that pretty much everyone agrees that this change of precedent is just naked corruption. And though the BBC can't exactly say that, they do say something that is along those same lines.
What is happening?
Yeah,
Explain.
I mean, it is utterly bonkers what has just happened in the past hour or so here.
So that is polite BBC language for what has happened here is so unprecedented. I am surprised that the House didn't fall out into punches and violence, because, again, It's just complete naked corruption. And in fact, things got so bad that barely even 5 minutes after this whole episode happened, William Ragg MP just tabled an early day motion of this member has no confidence in Mr. Speaker after that speech, because why would you have confidence in a speaker who quite openly advantaged his own party and then decided to justify it by saying, oh, this president is outdated? Like, that's just a post hoc rationalisation. It's so naked to anyone paying attention that it's not even funny. And that wasn't the only immediate reaction in the House of Commons. After this, frankly, embarrassing show by the Speaker of the House. Here is Stephen Flynn, who put forward his opinion on what was this farce in the Commons.
For that. Madam Deputy Speaker, if I have listened correctly to what has just been said, on SNP Opposition Day, should the Labour Party's motion be carried, then the SNP's vote will not be held.
Yeah, more or less that was what was said. The SNP are being treated as if it's not their opposition day, as if they're not part of the government. And look, I'm not even a fan of their amendment. It's very Gaza-sided. I don't even agree with it, but at the same time, they're part of the government. It's not down to the Speaker to get rid of that sort of thing in favour of Labour's. And again, we'll get into detail of this. I mean, you've got to remember, throughout this entire episode, Mr. Speaker has put into question the legitimacy of Parliament because Labour wanted to get a vote through about a war that is happening on the other side of Europe. This isn't domestic issues. This isn't about the British people. This is about people that aren't British, who are miles away, who are in a war, which is quite frankly their own business. And not only that, if we do call for a ceasefire in Britain, you think Israel are going to listen to us at all? I think that's the most damning thing of this whole thing. We are such on a whim in the Commons, as it turns out, that Starmer is willing to just throw away parliamentary precedent for his own gain and to relax a rebellion in his own party. That should never ever be allowed, and Lindsay Hoyle, on that alone, should be sacked, or should resign, I should say. Can't be sacked.
Secondly, if I have read the clerk's letter to all members correctly, which was sent to the Speaker, this was a consequence that he was warned of. So can you please advise me, where on earth is the Speaker of the House of Commons? How do we bring him to this House now to explain to the Scottish National Party why our views and our votes in this House are irrelevant to him?
Honestly, I'll just let that play out because, you know, this is how parliamentary democracy should work. This is how our public debate should work. We have precedent for when the SNP can bring their amendments forward, and as the Speaker of the House has ruled, the SNP don't get that today on their own opposition day, and the Clerk of the House, whose letter we will go through momentarily, pointed out that this could be a consequence. The Speaker knew this, the Speaker went ahead with it. Why did the Speaker go ahead with it? Well, don't worry, everything will be covered. So this was Tom Goldsmith's, Clerk of the House's letter to the Speaker. So in January 2020, he wrote to my predecessor establishing a procedure which he could record his views regarding any of your decisions which he felt compromise a substantial breach of standing orders or a departure from long-established conventions, like he has done today. You asked him to place in the library a note of any such view, and you undertook to make the House aware if he did so. I am today exercising the opportunity to place on record my view that the decision to allow an official opposition spokesperson to speak and move an amendment before a government minister in response to an SNP spokesperson moving that opposition day motion represents a departure from the long-established convention for dealing with such amendments on opposition days, governed by Standing Order number 31, where an orderly government amendment to leave some words of the motion and insert others is tabled and selected. The expectation is that such an amendment is then moved by the Minister in the second speech of the debate, and once the amendment has been moved, the Standing Order provides that the first question considered by the House at the end of the debate must be the text of the original motion. If that is negated, the question is put on the government's amendment. When introducing the proposal in 1979, the Leader of the House said the arrangements were so that a vote could take place on the opposition's own motion. The procedural impact of the decision taken today is that the first division is likely to be on the official opposition's amendment rather than on the SNP's motion, and depending on the outcome of any such division, it is possible that the House will not be able to vote on the SNP motion, nor on the government's alternative proposition. In other words, Mr. Lindsay Hoyle, what you are doing today is putting Labour's agenda above that of the other parties, despite being in opposition and not having their own opposition day to do it, in which they have 17 other days they can do that. In other words, this is a very, very polite way of saying what you are partaking in is naked corruption. If you do this, you will suffer quite grave consequences, of which I'm not quite sure what they will be. No doubt, though, you will be under fire and probably have votes of no confidence. At least that's what it looks like at the moment. In taking this step, I recognise that A, your decision is not specifically precluded by any standing order, B, the Speaker and his deputies have complete discretion regarding the order in which to call members to speak, C, the Speaker has discretion over which amendments to select, D, there have been 2 occasions in the last 25 years or so when an amendment has been moved by an opposition party member from a party other than that one day had been allotted, as well as one when the government backbencher moved which an amendment, and on which of those occasions the official opposition member was called to move his amendment before a minister was called. However, in those few circumstances, no government amendment has been tabled. To make point D quite clear, what he is saying is that this precedent has been broken twice in the past, but those circumstances in the past were different because no government amendment had been tabled, and therefore there was time to do all of the opposition's agenda. EU have been motivated by giving House what you considered to be the widest choice of decisions on alternative propositions on a subject of immense importance on which people in and outside the House have the strongest of views. Nevertheless, I know that you understand why I feel compelled to point out that long-established conventions are not being followed in this case. I'm grateful to you for making every effort to discuss this with me extensively and for taking full account of my views when reaching your decision, which I know was not an easy one, and of course is one for you to make. In other words, thank you for talking through this monumentally stupid decision with me. I am glad you at least talked to me about it before you made the stupid decision. Anyway, here are a number of reasons as to why you definitely shouldn't have done that. And though there is nothing I can actually do about this, please be prepared that there will probably be consequences because this is going to annoy a lot of people. It's kind of the subtext of this entire letter. And again, I just want to make clear what the actual difference between the amendments actually were. So this was the SNP's amendment, the one that the Labour Party decided it needed to push an amendment against. This House calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Israel, notes with shock and distress that the death toll has now risen beyond 28,000 people, the vast majority of whom are women and children. Further notes that there are currently 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, 610,000 of whom are children. Also notes that they have nowhere else to go, condemns any military assault on what is now the largest refugee camp in the world, further calls for the immediate release of all hostages taken by Hamas, and an end to the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, and recognises that the only way to stop the slaughter of innocent civilians is to press for a ceasefire now. Just to put that in clearer language, war is hell and we just call for a generic ceasefire, which effectively means Israel please no bully. That is their position, that is what they put forward to the House. This is what the Labour Party is against, and in fact, what the Labour put forward was this from David Lammy. I beg to move amendment to leave out from House to end and add, believes that an Israeli ground offensive in Rafah risks catastrophic humanitarian consequences and therefore must not take place. Notes the intolerable loss of Palestinian life, the majority being women and children, condemns the terrorism of Hamas who continue to hold hostages, supports Australia, Canada and New Zealand's call for Hamas to release and return all hostages, and for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, which means an immediate stop to the fighting and a ceasefire that lasts and is observed by all sides, noting that Israel cannot be expected to cease fighting if Hamas continues with violence, and that Israelis have a right to the assurance that the horror of 7 October 2023 cannot happen again. Therefore supports diplomatic mediation efforts to achieve a lasting ceasefire, demands that rapid and unimpeded humanitarian relief is provided to Gaza, further demands an end to settlement expansion and violence, urges Israel to comply with the International Court of Justice's provisional measures, calls for the UN Security Council to meet urgently and urges all international partners to work together to establish a diplomatic process to deliver the peace of a two-state solution, with a safe and secure Israel alongside a valuable Palestinian state, including working with international partners to recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to rather than outcome of that process, because statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people and not the gift of any neighbour. Now that is a much, much more reasonable motion for the House of Commons. It's one I side with more than the SNP's one. But it is not down to the Speaker of the House to put forward this more reasonable amendment, whether anyone agrees with it or not, whether he agrees with it or not, on SNP Opposition Day. I only put this point in because I want to say I agree more with Labour's amendment here, but there's absolutely no excuse for overturning parliamentary procedure just to put it forward. There's no way I can back that. Because at the end of the day, the way our parliament works is miles more important to me than what is happening over in Israel and Palestine. And also I want to make clear that the whole reason, again, for this complete colossal screw-up in Parliament from the Speaker is all down to what do we tell Israel for them to ignore? What do we put on the international stage for everyone to go, cool beans, right, carry on bombing Gaza? Like, seriously, this whole thing, this whole let's risk the legitimacy of Parliament, all to say to Israel, please no bully, and to Hamas, please release the hostages, or for them to both just ignore us. Like, we are not governed by serious people, by any stretch of the imagination, but the problem is that the Labour Party are actually quite scared that they are going to bottle the next election. That is genuinely what they're scared of, because their whole platform is so weak that I think everyone's kind of realising that apathy is going to win the next election. No one wants to vote. Going off recent by-election results, I think it was Wellington, it's never had a turnout of less than 60%. It was 30-odd% at the by-election, which, again, no by-election even has had under 60% turnout. People don't care anymore. People can see that Parliament is becoming a joke, and things like this aren't helping. And with no viable alternative, I know we've got reform, but let's be honest, reform's just a protest vote. No one, one, expects them to win, and two, if they do get into power, what do you expect them to do? The civil service hold all the power. And unfortunately, the joke of Parliament didn't end there. This is how the vote on Labour's amendment went.
The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as our opinion say aye. The ayes have it.
Effectively, what has happened there is the people shouting aye just kept making noise, kept shouting aye, when the Madam Deputy Speaker there is supposed to ask, and the nays. And obviously you can't hear the nays because the ayes are still shouting. And so she just goes ahead and says, oh, the ayes have it. And so this is what Jacob Rees-Mogg decided to put forward to Parliament immediately after this episode.
Quite clear from the level of noise when the question was put that the view of the Deputy Speaker was being challenged. I think it is absolutely extraordinary that that noise level was deemed to be aye. It is inconceivable that anybody hearing it would have thought it was aye. And it is quite clear from all our standing orders, all our traditions, that when the Speaker or Deputy's decision is challenged, it should go to a division.
I think it's worth pointing out at this point that the Deputy Speaker, Dame Rosie Winston, is yet again a Labour woman. Effectively what it looks like has happened here is that Starmer and his team have said no matter what to Lindsay Hoyle and probably the rest of the Deputy Speakers that this amendment will happen today and it will go through. And there's actually quite a lot of rumours being passed around all sorts of circles that this is actually pretty much what happened. I mean, again, none of this yet is substantiated, but this is definitely one of those no smoke without fires situations that I'm actually quite convinced of because of the amount of people and the amount of reporting going on around it. So BBC's political editor was the first one to come out with this, saying senior Labour figures tell me that the Commons Speaker was left in no doubt that Labour would bring him down after the general election unless he called Labour's Gaza amendment. And apparently the message was, you will need our votes to be re-elected as Speaker after election with strong indication this would not be forthcoming if he failed to call the Labour amendment. The Speaker's office have been in touch to say this is not true. For clarity, senior Labour sources briefed me on the messages. You will need our support after the election, and this may not be forthcoming. The Speaker met multiple MPs this week because he had an open door policy. So, of course, the Speaker's office is going to say this didn't happen, but senior Labour sources, I mean, who are they? Don't know. He can't really say, but he's got, from the looks of it, genuine messages there. It's quite hard to say. I mean, the trouble is that MPs will be constantly in talks with the media with things like this, and I wouldn't be shocked if this is being leaked by someone who can see the farce that they are all in. But the thing is, it's not just these tweets that are convincing me that this is true. The Guardian reported this as well. Hours away from the biggest rebellion of his leadership, Starmer decided to intervene personally and visited Hoyle in his office behind the House of Commons chamber. In other words, we know that Starmer definitely visited Lindsay Hoyle, and then he decides to then go against parliamentary precedent. You know, smoke without fire type thing. Something's clearly been said here. Those briefed on the meeting said Labour leader warned Hoyle that Labour MP security was at risk. Many had been deluged by criticisms, threats and abuse since abstaining on a similar SNP motion in November. With hundreds of protesters congregating outside Parliament, they worried worse might be to come, and we will get into that as well. After a tense meeting with the Labour MPs desperately stalling inside the chamber, Hoyle eventually agreed. As the Gaza debate started, the Speaker announced he would call both Labour and government amendments, prompting fury on the government and SNP benches and huge relief to the Labour ones. So, assuming all of this is true, and I am yet to see any evidence against this being true, this is the worst example of Parliament being intimidated that I have ever seen. This is Parliament quite literally changing the way itself works due to intimidation from what is quite frankly a foreign cohort. Because as I have gone through for weeks, all of these protests, if we can even call them that at this point, are quite clearly from majority non-Brits. And if you find that offensive because not a lot of them are white, I don't care at this point. We have got to the point where Parliament is having to change its own procedures to not risk violence, when in reality, if you do get violence, you get the army out. You pacify them. You do everything within your power that is necessary to make sure that Parliament is not changing the way it works. It is sovereign. It is the highest, most important piece of political power that we have in this country, and it is being overturned by a mob of a few thousand people because they care about a war going on miles away. If they really cared about the war, by the way, they'd be going over there fighting for it, but they're not doing that. They're staying here and causing problems for us instead. No, we can't allow that. We have to pacify this problem by any legal and reasonable means necessary. If they start getting violent over this, we are well within our rights to use the army against them. And this news wasn't just uniquely for The Guardian. Beth Rigby of Sky News said, "On the matter of pressure on the Speaker, I am told that many MPs made personal pleas to Sir Lindsay about amendments. MPs have growing concerns for personal safety after incidents of confrontations and protests over the Israel-Hamas war." Which, as far as I'm concerned, if MPs are starting to get these problems, at the very least, hopefully you'd expect that they would start doing something about it to, say, deport these people or put them in jail. But no, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that, by the way. What Labour are going to do is appease this mob. As we have seen, the first thing they do when they run into this type of trouble, appease them. We cannot risk that being in Parliament. We cannot have that be our government position, that we bow down to the mob. No, you are in Parliament. It is sovereign. You actually have the power to get rid of all these Human Rights Act and European Court of Justice amendments. You can get them all out, put in reasonable legislation, and kick all these problem people out. You are well within your power to do that. Because at this point, if the world stage is saying you need to bow down to the mob, the world stage doesn't matter. We are our own island. We are a sovereign nation. We can actually do as we please. And GB News even got sources on this. "Some of us are really scared to leave. One of my female colleagues was surrounded by nasty protesters in Westminster Hall earlier and filmed, etc. She was in tears when she came back to the tea room, just saying it is intolerable. So what are you going to do? Oh, appease them. Yeah, good one." And the thing is as well, is that we have evidence that these are actually credible threats. Because Paul Sweeney, a Labour MSP, had this to say: "The Glasgow constituency office of Labour MSPs was stormed by protesters this afternoon, terrifying and threatening our staff who are working to help Glasgow constituents. Thanks to Police Scotland for ensuring their safety. The Speaker is right to calm this down." Which, already, I am really, really, really hating that last sentence. The Speaker did the right thing to calm these things down. No, the Speaker did the complete wrong thing by appeasing to these people to calm them down. No. As I say, if they start to get violent, we need to pacify, arrest, and deport them, assuming they're not British citizens. This cannot be allowed, and yet it is being allowed, and not even just being allowed. Labour are playing apologia for this, and we'll get into more details of this later, because Labour's reaction is either to say, Speaker did the right thing, actually, or to just completely ignore the problems that happen in Parliament today. Anyway, on screen now is a video of the storming of the Labour MSP's offices, and as you can see, they did get in. And the thing you have to remember with this is that it will be selective clips that they have put together in this compilation, because it is actually from a pro-Palestine activist. And so while we did see some knocking on doors, the most of what you will see in these clips is kind of the older white boomers who most people will see as not particularly threatening, but if you actually look when they zoom out, you'll see more younger people that I think were whom the staff were, let's say, scared of. But as you can see, not an awful lot happened, but really when we get into detail of it, the reason not an awful lot happened is because there was a police presence. That's pretty much it. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I've not seen any evidence that there were any arrests or people facing consequences for this. As far as I'm aware, the police just stood in front of the door, talked to them a bit, and said, "Nah, get out of here." And so the question is what would have happened if the police were not present there? Well, the question is, we don't really know. But if I was in government and there were pro-Palestine protesters coming into my offices, yeah, I'd be quite scared too. I mean, they quite clearly had to lock the door. They were clearly scared, and whether that was justified or not, I'm not too sure, but given that Labour MPs will be talking to each other and saying that they're scared of this type of thing happening, I think it's fairly legitimate. Well, with all that being said, still on the same day, by the way, Lindsay Hoyle eventually had to return to Parliament to explain his actions. So let's go through his explanation.
And I've got to say, I regret how it's ended up. It was not my intention. I wanted all to ensure they could express their views and all sides of the House could vote.
Well then, as President dictates, they have to wait for their own opposition day, Mr. Hoyle. You can't just say, oh, he's trying to use the fairness argument here. Oh, it didn't feel fair that Labour couldn't put their amendment in. Well, tough biddies, my dude. It doesn't matter. You can't just change precedent on a whim like this. This is why everyone is annoyed. I mean, technically you do have the power to do that, but the whole point of Parliament is that, yes, Parliament can technically just do what it wants, but we have these precedents in place to make sure that there is order. And you have caused disorder as the man who is supposed to referee the order of the House.
As it was, in particular, the SNP were ultimately unable to vote on their proposition. I am, and I regret, with my sadness, that it's ended up on like that, in this position. That was never my intention for it to end up like this.
Yeah, I don't care. I have no sympathy. I have no sympathy for you whatsoever. The correct decision to make here was to carry on with precedent and let Labour deal with it. But the problem is that they threatened your position in the House, and you found that intolerable. Well, if anyone threatened your position like that, a better decision would have just been to, instead of making the speech at the start to say we're going to change precedent, I was asked to change precedent, I decided not to, here is what was said, here are the problems we have, I thought I would just put that forward for you, and in future debates we can probably talk about it, but for now we will carry on as usual. But you didn't do that. And you didn't do that because you care about your own job and position more than you do about what the office you hold represents and is supposed to do. And quite frankly, if you are this susceptible to corruption, whether your intentions are noble or not, you deserve to be kicked out. You should resign if you have any sense of dignity about the office you hold or about yourself. And if you don't, then as far as I'm concerned, you are much worse than John Bercow. Much worse. And look where he's gone now. He was a bad Speaker of the House, you're an even worse one. You're going to be a nobody after this, I'm afraid, and people are not going to respect you.
I was absolutely convinced that the decision was done with the right intentions. I recognise the strength of feeling of members on this issue.
The man is close to tears because he has been put in an impossible position where he effectively thought, he probably thought anyway, that he could get away with it because he knows Labour are going to be in power next, so he just needs to wait for this to blow over and leave. But no, nobody should let this go. Nobody should demand anything less than his resignation. Hence, there has already been a motion of no confidence put forward to the House. And I expect him to be losing his job within the month.
Clear today has not shown the House at its best. I will reflect on my part in that of the course I recommit myself to ensuring that all members of this House are treated fairly. I do not want it to have ended like this. I want to say to the House, I will meet with all the key players of each party.
This is very much coming off as an apology that's more of a, I'm sorry I got caught, which I don't know why you think he'd get away with it, rather than a, I'm genuinely sorry for what I did. That's just how it's coming off to me. But at the very least, I suppose, at least he's making amends, but honestly, what he did, in my opinion, is completely unforgivable and means that he should never be allowed to sit in the Houses of Commons again. Because from the looks of it, the man got corrupted within an hour. It took an hour to be convinced that we need to break parliamentary procedures. Okay, it's for the safety of MPs, but as I have said, there should be other means to keep those people safe. And if we're not doing that, we're failing as a country, but it's not up to Parliament to change how it works. To do that, it is up to the country to change how it works to protect these MPs.
Can I just put that correct? I've never met with Sue Gray today. I didn't bump into her today. I'm offended by that comment. I think you'd like to withdraw it.
I do find the mention of Sue Gray by a heckler quite funny, because it's quite clear that MPs have actually noticed that it is Sue Gray who is definitely at the levers of power within the Labour Party, and I have no doubt that she had some part to play in this, but obviously she didn't personally meet Lindsay Hoyle, though, as he says, he has met her in the past, which I assume makes sense given that she is Labour's Chief of Staff. However, I suppose it is good that MPs are actually noticing that, yes, the Labour Party have an ex-civil servant who wrote the report that brought down Boris Johnson, and people are smelling a rat now because it appears that the Labour Party is partaking in open corruption, as we are showing. But he's offended that someone said Sue Gray met him today, and he's basically said, no, I didn't meet her today, that was different days. So much better.
Yeah, because that is the danger, that we've ended up with this House in speculation of not what is fact and not factual.
Oh, this House is speculating. Well, of course it is. You're partaking in secretive corruption. What are we supposed to do? You have quite literally brought into question your own office's commitment to integrity, dignity, and keeping in place parliamentary procedure. You have literally brought that into question because of your own actions. I have no sympathy that people are speculating about things like that. And if you're offended by it, I don't care. You only have yourself to blame.
I am honest to this House. I am true to this House. I believe in all members of this House. And I have tried to do what I thought was the right thing for all sides of this House.
No, you listen to a bunch of MPs and Keir Starmer plea to please help us not have this rebellion. Please think of the safety of these MPs, and you went along with it. No, you did not think what was best for all members of the House. You thought, what is best for Labour? That is all you thought. That is quite openly what's happened here. And the fact that within your apology you are making this lie? Yeah, even less sympathy. Get out. Anyway, he goes on to just reiterate points that he has already made, so I think that is enough of Lindsay Hoyle for one day. And the thing is that a lot of Labour activists have actually come out and effectively said, oh, yeah, this actually is a complete embarrassment. We're on the SNP side here, which in part is true because they want Israel to just stop bombing Gaza no matter what, whereas Labour's position, as I say, was a lot more reasonable, probably due to the fact that Keir Starmer is effectively paranoid to being called anti-Semitic, and if he had Labour MPs voting for the SNP's quite frankly anti-Israel stance, then that gives people ammunition to call him anti-Semitic, and then, oh, what do you know, that's what brought down Corbyn, that could bring me down. And I actually think that's a reasonable worry. But the way you do that is by kicking out people who are openly anti-Semitic, which you've been doing, you've just been doing very slowly. To then partake in this corruption and convince the Speaker of the House to partake in the corruption that you are trying to conspire in, yeah, that's probably actually worse than just being called anti-Semitic. So here's an example from Rachel Swindon. The Labour Party and the Speaker have made an absolute joke of one of the most serious matters of our time, disgusting, and that's something that you will see a lot from pro-Palestine people. It's, oh, people are dying, and all our government can do is argue with each other, without a hint of irony in the fact that Israel and Gaza are just going to ignore us anyway, no matter what we say. They're going to keep doing what they're doing. Ash Sarkar had a clip from David Lammy saying the reason why Labour can't vote for SNP's ceasefire motion, according to the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy, is because it's an election year. Glad to know he's got his priorities in the right order, poll numbers above Palestine lives. And given I can't trust a single word Ash Sarkar says, let's listen to the clip ourselves.
Could you hold your nose and vote for it if it is the best thing on the table tomorrow?
I don't want to do anything in an election year in which the Labour Party might have the privilege of serving that cuts across our ability to do that.
All right, fair enough. Ash Sarkar actually accurately transposed what David Lammy said there, so fair enough. But at the same time, yes, real politics in the UK does come above lives that are being lost across the Mediterranean. And I don't think anyone serious in Parliament should realistically be guilted over the deaths of Palestinians, because yes, we are tacitly allies of Israel, but this is not a war that we are being called into, and it's certainly, you know, we're not allies of Palestine. It's not like we're in a catch-22. I don't care about Palestine, so it's not something to break the alliance over. But if people like Ash Sarkar were in government, we absolutely would, and we'd just be an embarrassment on the world stage because of it. Effectively, Ash Sarkar wants us allied with Iran before we are allied with the rest of Europe. That is effectively Ash Sarkar's position there. Anyway, on to the Labour MPs' reactions of yesterday, and as I say, effectively all of them are gaslighting by either completely ignoring the corruption that they were either partaking in or complicit with, or just saying, oh, the Tories are worse, though. So Wes Streeting said, amidst this farce, the House of Commons voted for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, international aid, and the recognition of a Palestinian state. Everything else is parliamentary theatrics and partisan noise. So, and this is a great example of it. So, because Labour got through what they wanted, nothing else that happened in Parliament really matters. It's just partisan noise. It's just theatrics. No, you quite literally change the way Parliament works to push through your agenda. That, no matter how much I agree or disagree with it, cannot be tolerated. And the fact that you are gaslighting the public about what happened there, to me that should just ban you from Parliament for life. How can you be that nakedly corrupt and then lie about it? Liz Kendall said a similar thing. The motion just passed in the House of Commons, which has my full backing and support. Whatever else you see or read about tonight's events, these are the only issues we should be focused on. No, I'm afraid not. I do not care about the issues at the other side of Europe. I care about how you have bastardised Parliament. Shabana Mahmood said, the most important thing tonight in the House of Commons has passed a motion calling for an immediate ceasefire, no ground offensive, the release of hostages and a path to peace with the recognition of the Palestinian state. Again, just more gaslighting. Oh, this is all that matters tonight. It is so typical of Labour. Typical of them. To say, don't care about what's going on in your own country and most of all, your own government. Only care about the fact that this government has passed a bill that says, hey, Israel, please have a ceasefire, that they are going to ignore. That is very typical of Labour. Forget things that actually matter. Focus on this thing that we have done that doesn't matter at all. These people want to be in government and they are deeply unserious. Do not vote for them. Vote for literally anybody else. I think I'd take the Greens at this point. However, I think my absolute favourite tweet of the night has to come from Jess Phillips. I do not understand parliamentary procedure with any detailed knowledge, but I know delaying tactics and slowdowns when I see them, and the Tories were desperate to do it today. So I think my favourite part of all this is that Jess Phillips, who has been an MP since 2015, so that's coming up to 9 years, openly just saying she doesn't understand her own job. She doesn't understand the procedures that she is supposed to go through. She just openly said that. This is how little Labour care, by the way. They do not care about the procedures they have to go through. They don't care about understanding their own job. They only care about how they look to the common man. That's all they care about. And the problem is that the common man isn't you and me. The common man are the students of Oxford. They are the writers at The Guardian. They are the people in the civil service, the people that would say, hey, what you're doing is good. And this is probably why they're gaslighting the public, because they've been told, oh yeah, what you did was good. You know, you kept stability in the Labour Party, you quashed a rebellion, you're going to get in and you're going to beat the Tories. And that's all they're told, so therefore they feel justified in gaslighting. And here's Jess Phillips saying, I don't actually understand what happened today, but all I know is that the Tories are bad. That's what Jess Phillips said there, and frankly, again, another person who should just be barred from Parliament because of the contempt that she has for Parliament. And the thing is that these MPs can gaslight us all they want, but there is an entire thread of the protest that was going on outside of the House of Commons yesterday, and I mean, just take a look at this clip. It's one of many, but I'm only going to show you this one, and you can look at the rest if you like, but just take a look. For those of you who can't hear the screams of people chimping out, what they were screaming was Intifada Revolution. And again, I don't know how many times I need to say this in a video. Intifada effectively means a crusade against Israel. It means the total destruction of it. It is not a call for a ceasefire at all. And this is what the misguided Labour MPs are trying to tell you. Oh, these people just want ceasefire. These people just want ceasefire. That's the front of it. You then actually hear in the background things that Lindsay Hoyle has heard as well. It's, oh no, these Labour MPs genuinely have a threat of violence. And it's from people like this. People who do not agree that we should be allies with Israel and tacitly support them in destroying what is frankly a terrorist state. No, they are in fact supportive of the terrorist state, and actually they frankly not only hate Israel but hate the country. And honestly, when some MPs are saying Israel's security is our security, I think this is what they're touching on. I mean, I want to make it clear, I don't agree with that statement necessarily, but I do think that it is quite clear that the people who are against Israel happen to also be completely against the West. And I think it's about time we actually do something about it. And the thing is, it's not just these chants, they went another level above. As you can see from this video, they are projecting onto Big Ben at the House of Commons from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is a war chant. That is a chant of Israel will not exist, we will only have a Palestinian state, Israel must be destroyed. And if that is the chant of the state next to you, that effectively you are not allowed to exist, of course total war is perfectly justifiable. But I think to finish off this video, we should finish with a Geoffrey Cox tweet, as he absolutely nails the position that the Speaker put himself in. There are two possible explanations for the Speaker's decision to abandon long-standing convention. First, he did it to assist the former party leader to get out of a bind. Secondly, as he says, he did it in a misguided attempt to protect certain Labour MPs from intimidation they said would otherwise have followed if they had followed the votes against the SNP motion. Either reason is unacceptable. If the former is an abuse of his office, if the latter, it is an abject surrender to intolerance and tyranny, it meekly offers up the House of Commons as able to be influenced by external threats. And that is absolutely correct. There is absolutely nothing in this entire procedure that makes the Speaker look good in any way. I suppose at least with the latter one, you can at least say his heart was in the right place. But this is the thing, Geoffrey Cox is kind of giving him two options. I do not at all accept the second option there, because it doesn't make any sense. Why, if agreeing with the SNP vote that was effectively totally on Palestine's side, would these pro-Palestinian protesters that we directly saw in videos breaking into offices of Labour MPs, would they commit violence for being on Palestine's side? Why would any of that make sense? Why would they intimidate these MPs to vote to be more on Palestine's side when they are pro-Palestine protesters? That doesn't make any sense. No, what we have seen yesterday was open and complete corruption and contempt of Parliament, and absolutely everyone involved should be kicked out. They should never be allowed in Parliament again. What they did to Boris Johnson was much worse than what is going to happen to anyone involved in this, and what Boris Johnson did was eat cake with people he was already working with, under the advice of his own secretaries that he was not breaking COVID rules. Oh, and who wrote that? Sue Gray. Where does Sue Gray work now? Oh, this openly corrupt Labour Party. Yes, what we have seen over the past few years is what it has been quite hard to describe to people, that really, Labour are in power. Not so much directly in the House of Commons, but within the civil service, in the Speaker's chair. In pretty much everywhere where we have an institution, it is Labour in charge. And this, as far as I'm concerned, has proved it. And they need to face consequences for all this widespread corruption. Yet the Tories have absolutely no willpower to do anything about it, probably because half of the Tory MPs, quite frankly, should just be Labour MPs anyway. Having said all this, however, it appears that something might actually happen to the Speaker in the coming days, as more than 50 MPs, including more than half of all SNP MPs, have signed Commons' motion of no confidence in the Speaker. More than 50 MPs have now signed the Commons early day motion expressing no confidence in the Speaker, again brought forward by a Tory. 30 of them are Conservative, 22 of them are SNP, and one is an ex-Tory now sitting as an independent. I imagine that's Andrew Briggan. In some respects, the SNP signatories are more of a worry for Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Fewer than 10% of Conservative MPs have signed, but more than half of the SNP's parliamentary party have now lost confidence in him. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that number grows over the coming days. And if it gets to the point where there is no confidence in the Speaker, I will be very happy. I assume that needs to be half of MPs, but I'm happy to be corrected in the comments. Wouldn't you know it, as I am making this video, the number's going up. There are now 57 signatures on the Commons early day motion expressing no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle. That suggests it won't be long before the tally reaches 65, which would represent 10% of the House. Okay, so 10% of the House need to have no confidence in the Speaker to bring it forward. So that could literally happen today. And if it does, it will be a very interesting Laughing at the Guardian stream tomorrow. And I hope it is, because I can only imagine that I will make a very, very excellent thumbnail of all of us effectively kicking the Speaker out of the Commons in the thumbnail, because this is an absolute joke. He should be kicked out forever. He should never be allowed anywhere near a government position again, because he has shown he cannot be trusted. And as for the Labour Party, they should suffer at the ballot box for this, but no doubt they probably won't, because literally no one wants to vote for anyone else either. So, as I say, voter apathy is going to be the real winner next election, and that's going to be a default Labour government. So I suppose we just have to expect more of this and just hope that the opposition parties can actually do something useful. But in reality, we're going to see the clown decade get a hell of a lot worse. And hopefully as it gets worse, we will see the people rise out of the ashes of Britain who are going to effectively save it. So I suppose as your white pill there, expect the worst, but hope for the best. But that is everything I have for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.